Right here, I have just our drawing for what we're going to be working on today. We're going to be working on a little drill press vise here. So this drawing was sent out in the package ahead of time. So feel free to open this up on your own computer and kind of follow along as I go. We're just going to jump right into Fusion 360 right now. And I'm actually going to open up this file just to kind of go through the different view tools and all of that with you guys really quickly. So this is the Fusion 360 interface, and just to kind of go through everything real quick, on the left here, we have our data panel. So this is how I would access any of the CAD files that I've already created. This works much like a file structure in any other program, like File Explorer on Windows or whatever. All these are saved in here, whether they be drawings, the CAD models, etc. If I need to add anything to this, I can always click the upload button, and then you can drag and drop pretty much any CAD program into here, and it will upload it into the folder you have open, or you can change it by hitting this change location. I'm going to hide this data panel right now just because it's going to give us more view of everything else that's going on here. If you ever need to access it, just hitting all these little squares up here at the top brings up this little menu for us. So right along the top, we have our main toolbar, and this is where most of the tools are held for doing the different entities, whether they're sketches, extrudes. We get into modify, so that would be some other things like fillets and such, and all the other ones get into assemblies, construction planes, and stuff we're not really going to cover because they're more advanced features. On the side here, we have our browser, so this would be the area that shows us any of the various components that are in this assembly here. They're all kind of listed here, and also our sketches, construction items, and everything are located there. Along the bottom is the timeline, and this is kind of like for anybody familiar with SolidWorks and how you can roll back in your features. This is that same idea where you can go through and move through your design to get an idea, or in case you need to like fix anything or you run into some kind of problem, you can kind of slide through it in that same way that you can slide through a SolidWorks program. Now all the view commands are held right up here in the view cube, and you can do your normal orbit by pressing and holding your center mouse wheel. You can do a selection by clicking and holding your left mouse button, and then that gets us to the other menu. I always forget which one's pan. I don't use it that much. Control and center mouse wheel is pan. Sorry, I don't use that feature as much. If you want to go through your various set views, they're all listed here on the view cube. So that's our top view, front view, and you'll see that it's also listing our coordinate system. So this is our X, Y, Z axes here, and that just gives you a good reference of where everything's sitting in space. If we ever get lost, if we're ever off in no man's land off here and we can't see anything, we can always just click this little house icon and it's going to bring us right back to our object. So I don't know why that popped back up again. Let's close out of this. And what we're going to do right now is I'm going to take this drawing and just stick it on my side view here so I can refer to it. And we're going to go through the process of actually drawing this. So anytime we're drawing anything, we're always going to start with a sketch because this is how we're going to define all of our profiles. Once I click on Create Sketch, it's going to bring up this interface where it shows me the origin of this particular model as well as all of the various planes. In this case, I'm going to select our XY plane so that we're drawing along this flat, and you'll see right now with the view cube, it's saying that we're looking at the front of the object. So if we look at the drawing real quick, I'm going to start with the side elevation, and we're going to draw in the shape of the saddle as well as the base here. So in this sketch, what I'll do is I'll take our line tool, and I'm going to start off of our origin here. You'll see that as you move your cursor around, it will kind of snap to certain entities. So here it's giving me this little square saying that it's snapped to the origin. As I move my cursor around, you'll see that we do have an angle, a distance, and if I hover in certain directions, you'll also see it starts to apply constraints. So in blue there, you can see that's a vertical constraint it's applying. If I go this way, it'll apply a horizontal one instead. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to draw this basic shape. And it doesn't matter if I get my dimensions exact yet, because we're going to fix that all in a minute. So one thing here is I do want to close up the shape of the saddle here. So I'm going to hover my cursor over this specific point and drag down, and you'll see that it catches that and holds it in line with that. So if I move around, it'll kind of snap back to it again. That's perfect because we want that line to be perpendicular. Now I just got to draw in here and here. And now we can start to add some of our dimensions. Now, you may have noticed that all the dimensions were coming in metric here, and our drawing is all in standard units. So what I'm going to do really quick is go to our document settings, and here we have our active units. If I click, I can select the different types here. So in this case, I can select inch, and now all the units have been set to inches. So I'm just going to go in and add all these dimensions. Up at the top here, this little dimension icon is what brings up this, and it works kind of like a smart dimension. So if I grab two lines like this, it'll ask me to put in a dimension between those two areas. I can also select a single line like that and assign a length to it that way. Let's say I get to a place where I have a dimension on a drawing and I'm not exactly, I can't remember what the decimal conversion is off the top of my head. I can always type in what that decimal what the fractional inch should be, and it will do the math in the background for me. So that's always nice. This one is 2 1/8. We want down here is 5/16. And over here is 3/32. 5/8. I'm just trying to get all these dimensions in here real quick for everyone. That actually doesn't look right. I think it's 1/8 inch. So if we look at all of our lines right now, you'll see that most of them are white. This is a good sign. That means that all of these are fully defined. If I click and try to move them around, they're not going to go anywhere because I've told Fusion exactly how all these entities are supposed to get set up. However, you can see there's this little light blue line over here, and if I drag it, it moves around. This is because it's not fully defined. I could add another 15/16 dimension here, but there's actually an easier way to get this design intent, and that's using the constraints up here. So in this case, if I select a collinear constraint, I can go collinear between this line and this line, and it now locks them into the exact same area, and now I can't drag them around. So that's kind of our primitive shape for our first sketch. So at this point, we can finish it up. And then we can go to the extrude command. So in the extrude command, it's asking us for a couple of things. First off, it's asking us for a profile. So if I hover my cursor over this sketch, you'll see that it kind of highlights the interior areas. These are the profiles that it's asking about. So if we grab the saddle in this case, we can, I'm just checking dimensions real quick. Okay. We can tell it, hey, we want this to extrude by 2 1/8. And you'll see that it brings it out in space. Now, from my design intent here, I know that everything's kind of working off of a center line. So how it's set up right now, it's only coming off of that one plane. What I can do is if I go to direction, I can change this from one side to symmetric. And then I can tell it that we want this 2 1/8 to be the whole length. And now it will extrude that from the center line evenly in both directions. The last thing we want to do is that our operation type, we want to change this to new component so that it creates a new component over in our browser here. I can now hit OK, and you'll see that it's generated the shape and hidden our original sketch. Real quickly, I'm just going to select our component 1 here, and if I click on it again, it'll highlight the text, and now I can rename it. So I could say Vice Base here. And this is super helpful when you have a big file with a lot of components in it. It can be a little confusing as to what is what, so I always like to try to make sure everything is fully labeled. Now, because it hid our sketch here, we can't access that other profile that we need to extrude, which is just the casting part of it. But if I go into our sketches here, I can actually show this sketch again just by clicking this little eye icon. Now I can go back to extrude, and I can pick our second shape, and this needs to be extruded 2 inches. And again, we want to set it to symmetric for our direction and set it to whole length. And here gives you a really good sense of what the difference is between whole length and half length, where half length it will actually end up being twice as wide. Now down at the operation, you'll see that it's automatically switched to this join operation, and this is perfect because it's looking at what geometry already exists and kind of trying to determine what it is that you're trying to do here. And in this case, it can intuit the fact that we want to join the casting base to the saddle itself. So I'll just hit OK now. And this is all going to be all one piece. I think I see, is there a question? Okay, that's just stuff that Dave was answering, just making sure. So the next thing we want to do is in our if I pull up our sketch again, so we have our side elevation taken care of, but now we need to get kind of this bottom plate and also this cutaway done in the section of the casting base. You can see here with a section line going through, there's a relief for these bolts here and here. So we can take care of these both with one sketch like we did on the saddle. So what I'll do is I'll select the bottom, I'll select the bottom of our vise here, and then we'll create a new sketch. And I'm going to start by drawing out the bottom plate here. So I'm going to start with as a primitive of a shape as possible. So in this case, we're going to start with a 2-point rectangle. And I just kind of click it and place it. And again, it doesn't need to be perfect. Oh, excuse me, just yet. The next thing I want to do is I want to go to our line tool. And what we want to do is we want to start to locate this rectangle on our existing shape. So the first thing I'm going to do is take a line and draw it from our origin And I'm going to move my cursor over this line until we start to see this little triangle icon show up. That triangle icon is telling me that I'm snapping to the center point of this line. So if I click that there, and then I move this around, you'll see that that line is always going to stay on the midpoint of that line there. Now to add some geometric constraint to this, let's select that line. First, over in our sketch palette here, we can set this to a construction line. And what that does is it tells Fusion this is a line not involved in establishing any profiles. Then I can add a horizontal constraint to it, and now it's locked that in. And you'll see that as I drag this line around, it's now kind of mirrored off that center line, which is perfect. So in our sketch, I can see that there are some 3/8 fillets in all these corners. So I'm just going to hit these all real quick. And we want to type in 0.375. I think I noticed something in that, yeah, when I did that, it broke my midpoint constraint. So to reapply that, I just need to select this endpoint of the line, our line that we need to add our midpoint to, and we can manually add that midpoint constraint. Now what I want to do is I want to establish the size of the vice base. So I can go with the dimension tool again, and I'll select these two lines, and it's 5 7/16. And then for our width, I'll select our two wide lines here, and we'll do 2 1/2. Now you'll see that we've got some of our white lines, so we're already getting some fully constrained, but we can still kind of slide in and out here. Looking at the side elevation, I can see there's an offset from here to here of 1/8 inch. So I just need to add that in and it'll fully constrain this base. So that's the base itself, but now of course we need to add in those little cutouts. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to roughly draw them in. We want to first off draw the center line of that slot. So I'm just going to draw a rough vertical line here. I'll select it and apply a construction to it, so that way it stays locked in and it's not used as any sketch geometry or anything like that. And now what I can do is I can draw in, actually, you know what, I want to start with a circle here. So I'll select our center diameter circle, and I'm just going to place it somewhere on our line. I can see that this hole is a 3/8 hole, so I'm going to just apply that dimension to it really quickly. And then we want to draw our little vertical lines coming up. Now again, if I hover my cursor over, you'll see that it will try to add constraints for us. In this case, we can see there's a little circle with a line, and what that is a tangent constraint. That's perfect, because that's exactly what I want here. And even though these lines aren't straight yet, I can quickly fix that just by adding in vertical constraints to them. I'll finish this off by drawing a line between them, making that a horizontal line. And then we just want to make that a construction line as well. So we have our slot shape here, but there's a couple of problems with all this overlapping geometry. So what we want to do is we want to go up to our trim tool. And now we're going to cut away any of the sections that we don't need. And then I can just take this little bit of remaining geometry and I'll just delete it with the delete key. So that's the shape of the slot itself, but the casting kind of swoops out a little bit around it. So let's just go into our Create tab, go down to Arc, and we want to go to a 3-point arc here. I'm going to draw my arc by specifying my start point, my end point, and then I can move it until I get my radius. And again, you can see that it's adding that tangent constraint for me. So again, start point, end point, and hover it until we get that tangent constraint. So now I just want to put a tangent constraint between these two lines as well, or those two arcs as well, and that will kind of lock all that in. If I go back to the trim tool, I can cut away that, and now we can see that whole swoopy section. So let's throw in some dimensions to kind of constrain where this is in space. I actually want to take this and lock that onto that line just so it's not floating. We'll do our sketch dimension, and we'll specify this line, which is 1 9/16. And then it's kind of weird how it calls it out in the drawing, but it's saying from this line to this line, so along this area, is an 1/8 inch. And then I have to specify the radii of these two arcs. So this one is a 1/2 inch radius, and this one is a 1 inch radius. It's also saying that the center of this circle is a 1/4 inch behind this line. So if I select the center point and then I select this line, I can specify that 1/4 inch. Now, we have this little swoopy bit and the slot drawn. And rather than going ahead and drawing all this again, we can be lazy about this and just use the mirror tool to grab the existing geometry and start to move it around the drawing. So if I select mirror here, and I select our two arcs as an example, it's going to ask us what our mirror line is. And so here I would just select the center line of the slot, and you'll see that it's giving us a preview of those two lines across that. So if I hit OK, it just establishes those there. And now I can just do a quick trim, and that cleans up that. Now, we want to do the same thing to get everything on the opposite side. So what we'll do is we'll again select mirror. It's asking us what objects we want to select, so we'll grab all of these entities, not that point. And then for a mirror line, we actually have a little center line down here that we can use. So if I select that, you'll see it flips everything right over to the other side, and I can just hit OK. Now I just want to drag this point to walk it onto this line. And that's just because with every CAD program you use, you really want to fully define your sketches like completely. Like you don't want to leave anything up to there being an issue. Because if there's a slight problem with any of the bits of geometry here, and you make a change, it can have a huge effect on how that gets interpreted. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take our trim tool once again, and it doesn't look like something, it looks like something's not quite lining up because it's cutting that entire section out. Why is it doing that? If I trim here, does it right? Okay. Let's kill those two. Bad coincidence. Is it going to fight me? It's going to fight me. That's obnoxious. Let me just fix this real quick. Usually the mirror command doesn't fight me like that. There we go. Now that should trim correctly. I must be breaking something, because it just lost a whole bunch of those. What happened? I lose. Whenever you have a problem like this, you can kind of click and drag some of your points to see if things get deformed. And what this is looking like to me is this is looking like there's just some weird bug happening in the background because nothing's really getting moved. So I know this goes against what I was just saying about everything needs to be fully defined, but for the sake of brevity here, I think we'll just forge ahead. So the only thing that we now need to add is also a little cutout section for our casting here. So I'm just going to add this to the same sketch so that we can use this center line to make this easier. So in this case, again, we'll go to create arc, and I'll draw in a 3-point arc here, let it take its tangency, and I'll take a 3-point arc here, and I'll let it, nope, it didn't quite. That's okay. We'll just apply a tangency here. So we want to establish what the radius is of each of these. So 0.5, 1. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to, again, mirror that line across the center. And now I can put a tangency between the two of them that kind of locks those all together. And now if we mirror these lines across our center again, we have most of that established. And now the only bit of dimensioning I have to do is I have to grab between this point, and the drawing is saying 1.5 there. And so that'll lock that in. Yeah, there must be something happening to the constraint of this line or something. Huh. All of my profiles are complete, right? Yep. Okay. So we can finish this sketch here. And now we get to extruding. So there's going to be a couple of steps here. First off, let's just extrude the casting base. So I'll go to our extrude command here. I'm going to select our profiles. And now we have, so far, we've only specified the exact distance to extrude something, but we can totally just take our extent here and tell it to go to object. And then if I specify this face, it's going to extrude only up to that. And you'll see that it actually, in this operation, we were talking earlier about how it will kind of intuit what you want. So here it intuited that we want to actually cut, which is perfect. So we're going to leave that alone, and we're going to hit OK. Again, it hit our sketch base, so we're just going to show that again. And now if I go back to extrude, we can extrude all of the base pieces. And those are 3/8 of an inch thick. But you'll notice that what it's trying to do is it's trying to extrude it pointing upwards, which is not correct. We want it to extrude the opposite direction. So to do that, all we have to do is drop a negative in front of our distance, and it will flip it the opposite direction. Once again, it's set to join, which is perfect. So we'll now just hit OK. So this is our basic shape here, and we can really see it starting to come into its own. So let's quickly just go and save. And for this, we'll say summer workshop bikes. And you can always specify your location. This is what we were talking about before with everything in the data panel. Oops, I did not mean to hit cancel. You hit save. And now you'll see that it saved that. And if we open up our data panel, we'll see it pops in here. So the next thing we want to do is we want to start to draw in the lead screw, which is going to be a new component here. So what we're going to do is we're going to go back to create sketch. And what we want to do is we want to select our mid plane here, but you'll see that it's kind of trying to grab all these faces of the part itself and won't let me select the plane. That's fine. If we click and hold, no, it didn't like me there. What the hell? We can also zoom out enough that the plane is no longer hidden by the object. So now this plane is existing in its own space and it doesn't have any references from any of our current geometry, and we need to fix that. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to go to create. We're going to go down to the bottom here to project include, and we're going to select the project tool. From here, I can select the inside faces of the saddle and hit OK. And now those lines are something that we can use in our next sketch here. So now I'm going to hide the vice base so we're just looking at what we have in front of us. So if we look back on the sketch, on the second page, we actually have a detail here of section B-B, and this shows us kind of what that cutaway looks like of the lead screw. So I'm going to draw in a center line for this lead screw. And here you'll see there are several constraints popping up, and they're all kind of doing different things. And we got to be very mindful about which one we choose. If I let it hover here, it grabs the center point or the midpoint of the line. And that could be a problem because then the line won't necessarily be flat. But if I hover the cursor up, you'll see that a little square shows up. And that's telling me that it's now perpendicular to that line. And that's exactly what we want. So we want to click that there.
Hey, Brian, we have a question.
Okay.
Can you change the view to slice the vice base if you are picking a work plane halfway in?
So
I'm trying to explain that if that's confusing.
Are you asking like a section view?
Kind of. So I'm used to, say, I'm picking a new work plane that's halfway through an object. I kind of like to see the context of the original shape. Mm-hmm. And right now you're sort of without that. I'm wondering if there's a way to, I'm not seeing anything that says views. Like I'm wondering how I manipulate views so I can.
Like a drawing view for, I'm not sure I follow exactly. So are you talking about like one of these drawing views?
Well, we're still in the original shape, right? Yep. So you have all the previous extrusions, but right now as you're sketching, you're not seeing the context of the original shape. I just like to see the context of the original shape, I guess.
So whenever you start a sketch, it's going to take whatever you put it on and use that as kind of its reference point. So, for example, when we were looking at the base down here, I selected the bottom of the vise. If I go here. And I selected this face. And when I selected that face, it's going to take this entire perimeter and kind of keep it in the sketch soft so that if I wanted to pull from it, I could. And so when I did some of my sketch entities here, that's exactly what I did, where I pulled the dimension from this line to this line, as an example. So when we're on this next one, the difference is that I'm working on one of the origin planes instead. I'm working on this origin plane, and that doesn't have any of the model geometry associated with it yet.
Yeah, that's what I was wondering about.
Okay.
Thank you. So there just essentially, I guess it looks like if you expand and you see the little eye icon, that is our equivalent of the view properties.
Yeah, so when I'm sketching, what I'll do, especially in this case, because I don't want to get confused, is I'll hit this little eye icon and it'll hide that part. And then I'm just looking at whatever's in the sketch. And I find that oftentimes if I have too many things showing, I'll get really overwhelmed and I won't really be able to tell what I'm looking at necessarily.
Okay. But if I kind of wanted to see it, I just kind of toggle between the eyeball and back and forth.
Yeah. There's also a way to go in and change the opacity of the object. So if you wanted to make it transparent or something, that is an option as well.
Okay. Thank you.
Not a problem. So with these entities drawn, we again know that these are all just kind of construction lines. So I'm just going to go in and set them as construction because these aren't going to be used for our next feature. They're just going to be used to help drive it. So I'm going to set a distance from the center line of our lead screw to the floor of the saddle as a 1/2 inch. And then we can draw in 1/2 of the shape of our lead screw. So I'll draw up, over, and I'll kind of set all these jogs. Well, that little checkbox is so in my way right now. And we'll come out like this. And I'll close the shape like this so we get a profile. So now I just need to take this and add all of the dimensions from that sketch. So this is 1/8 inch. This is 5/8 plus 3/8 is 1 inch. And then the diameters are 1/2 inch. 0.25 because it's half. And then this is a 1/2 10 Acme thread, so I'll just set that. I'll just make that a 1/4 inch as well. And we need to set this length to 1 7/8. And then this little round part here, it says is a 3/4 inch diameter. So I'll set that as 375 as half. So I'll click Finish Sketch here now because we have our rough shape drawn. And now instead of going to extrude, we're going to go to our next type, which is called a revolve. So if I click this, it already kind of has selected my profile because it saw what I just drew. And then I just select my axis as the center line, and it will revolve that shape around it. We'll see, it also, just like in extrude, will ask me what type of operation this is supposed to be. So I'll set this to new component once again, and then I'll hit OK. And we'll see component 2 is now in our tree. So if I name this lead screw, and then I can show, and we'll see both of our objects exist here in space. Excuse me. One more feature I want to add to the lead screw really quick is there's a square drive on this face. So to edit one specific component or another instead of the entire assembly, just like how there's an eye icon here, there's a little white dot on the other side that's called active component. And when you activate that, that means that any changes you make are going to apply specifically to that part. So now I can draw a little sketch on this end, and I'm going to project this profile because I do want to use that for something else a little bit in the future. And then I'm just going to draw in the little square drive. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to be kind of a pain in the butt and draw each line on its own. And the reason that I'm doing that is just so that I can get kind of that visual feel of it being tilted a little bit. I'll select these two lines here and apply an equal constraint to them so that they all kind of hit the same, so each of these is the same size. And now I just need to draw in a horizontal reference line. We'll make it a construction line once again. And I can set a dimension between here and here just to specify what this weird angle is going to be. In this case, I chose 30, but it's not an important one. I think it just looks better if it's not 0 and perfectly flat. It kind of adds that idea that that's a rotating component. So we'll hit finish sketch here, and then I'll extrude this. I can see in the drawing that it's supposed to be 3/8 of an inch. So if I go back to the sketch, one problem we have is we don't have our through hole for the lead screw. So if I show our sketch here, and I'm just going to hide the bodies so that we only have this sketch to work from, I can go back to our main assembly and hit activate up here. So now I'm back at the top level. And if I do another extrude really quick, I can just select all these profiles and tell it to go to object, and I'll tell it to go to this face. And once again, it automatically intuits that it wants to be a cut operation, so we can hit OK. And now if I hide the sketch and show the body, we'll see that that's kind of like in that space there. So if we hit save again, after having done that initial save as, it's going to ask us if we want to put a version description in. I just habitually hit Control S and this popped up, so this is a great little thing to cover now. And you can add whatever comments you want in here. So if this helps you keep track of your projects, we can totally just add in little version notes and be like, got the lead screw drawn. And then we know if we're going through this at any point, what specific or what happened in each specific version of the file, because you'll see that it went from V1 to V2 up here at the top. Now, we have most everything drawn here. But the thing is that if I like click and move stuff around right now, everything is kind of floating in space and nothing is locked in as it should be, really. So we need to add a couple of what are referred to as joints. So the first thing we want to do is we want to grab whatever is our base component. So if this is our vice base, for example, we right click on it and we want to set ground here, right below activate. It's just right up at the top. And what this does is it means that this vice base is now set as permanent. This is a fixed thing in space and it can't move around. Of course, our lead screws can still move around, but at least we now have the base established. So if I go to our assemble tab here and I click on joint, which is also this icon here, it's going to ask us components have moved. Do we want to continue our capture position? In this case, we will want to capture position just so this lead screw is not in the way. And I'll show you what that means in a minute. And then we can see that it's kind of looking at the lead screw and being like, okay, this is the floating part. How do we want to lock this into our assembly? So what I can do is if I hover my cursor over this, we'll see that one selects a face or an entity, and then it kind of gives us all these little anchor points. If I select the outer circle here, you'll see that it's kind of snapping to the center of that. So if I click this one here, and now it's grayed out our lead screw and it's showing our base, so it knows, hey, you probably want to anchor this to the fixed object. I can do the same thing though, and I'll hover over the circle, and you'll see that it locks it right to that center. So it now moves this part in, and it shows us a little animation actually even of it kind of just locked there in place. Now that's not true to what this assembly is. So if I go to the motion tab, I can apply different types of motion to this joint. So in this case, I could set it to be revolute, and you'll see the animation is now showing it spinning, much like a lead screw actually would. We'll hit OK here. And I just want to hide the joints folder just because I don't like seeing those pop up. So two last things I want to cover real quick, because we can see that we have the vise, but we don't have the mobile jaw. If I go into our data panel, I did provide this ahead of time. There is a mobile jaw file that we sent out to everybody. If you haven't already uploaded it, just go through the process of hitting upload here. And then if I just really quickly demonstrate. If this is our mobile jaw, we can just click and drag it into the window and then hit upload, and it will bring it up onto your cloud. So we can take that component, and if we right click on it, the second option from the top is insert into current design. So I'm going to do that here. And it drops it right into our assembly. This is perfect. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit OK. But of course, just like the lead screw, when I drop it in, it doesn't know where it needs to be in space. So what I want to do is I want to close this panel, and I want to do another joint. We're going to capture position once again. And what I'm going to do here is, this may seem like a little bit of a weird choice, but it will make sense in a second, is again, we're going to hover over the bottom face of the mobile jaw and select the center front. And then on the vise base itself, we want to grab this point, which is the corresponding point on the saddle floor. I happen to just click the wrong one at the end there. So if you ever click the wrong one, you can always hit this little X mark next to your selected object to give it another go. So it's picking this, but of course it's still applying that revolute mate to it. So let's really quickly, we can go back to our rigid, and it's kind of interesting that it's rotated like this. But in this case, what we actually want to do is we want to give it a slider. And here we want it to slide along the the y-axis, so that it's sliding along. And also I need to tell it, hey, this 90-degree angle that you applied, go away. So let me just make sure that that's still going the right way. Yeah. So now this jaw has been set with a little bit of a slider going on. The last thing I want to cover is if we look at the drawing, once again, we could see out at this end, there's a little shaft collar with a McMaster part callout. To save ourselves a lot of time drawing individual components, what we can do instead is if we go to the Insert tab here, we can select Insert McMaster Car Component. And what this does is it brings us to the McMaster Car website. And I can type in that part number, so 6435K14. And it'll bring us right to that page. And we can see it says product detail here with a little cat icon. If we click on that, it'll bring us to the specific page for this item. And if we go down to where there's the drawing, we can see over on the side here, there are the 3D models that they have available. We just change this to 3D step and save. And now what it's going to do is it's going to take that CAD model and just drop it straight in our assembly. I'm just going to place it here, hide our base real quick, and do our last mate, or last joint, sorry. So once again, I'll just hit capture position, and I'll hover my cursor over this to try to get that center point. Do the same thing over here to kind of lock it against that. And once again, it's applying a slider motion to it. So we want to switch this back to rigid now because it's just going to lock this in place. Now it's occupying the same space as that flange, so I just want to flip it. And then if we click this arrow, we need to move it out so that it's not occupying the same space as that base. So if I just go 625, it'll go out by that distance. And then I just hit OK. And then we can see that that component's assembled. And if I rotate the lead screw, it rotates specifically with the lead screw. So that about covers all I can fit into an hour. So I'll open the floor up to questions at this point.